Good afternoon, friends. Sorry to have kept you waiting, but such are the pressures of time. And our distinguished speaker has had several appointments to keep, and here he is with us. I think the first remark I would like to speak about the speaker is that he's a global citizen in the full sense of the term, born in El Salvador and from an Arab family, and was educated in the U.S., so he is in every sense what the Lee Kuan Yew School represents, a global institution, and sir, you have come to speak at a global institution. I run a small outfit called Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, so this is the big brother that you have, and I'm very pleased to have been invited to speak. And I think the topic that Mr. Juan Jose Daboub, Managing Director, the World Bank, has chosen to speak is very timely and very opportune. The food crisis, challenges for a new Asia. As you know, in the rising Asia, we have two great big producers as well as consumers of food, India and China. And what they are going to do is going to affect, or what they won't do is going to affect the rest of Asia. So you would agree with me that this is a very timely topic chosen by the school to address. And I'm glad that so many of you are here to listen to this very important topic. Without further ado, may I ask our distinguished speaker to address us. After that, there will be a Q&A.
Thank you, Ambassador, and good afternoon to everybody. Again, my apologies for being a few minutes late. I guess after visiting the port a few years ago, having a chance to see how that has evolved, it's a great symbol of what Singapore continues to achieve. I am very honored to be at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. I come from a country, El Salvador, that has followed the Singaporean miracle very closely and has tried to emulate a lot of what this country has been able to do. And now, from my current job at the World Bank, what we are trying to do is to exchange experiences from Singapore and other countries with those other countries which are a little bit behind in terms of development, and hopefully they will take those lessons and adapt them to their reality and have ownership and be able to implement them as change takes place in their communities. We have come to a critical period in Asia's history. It is clear now more than ever that the future will not be an extension of the past. As this new world continues to take shape, those of us in business, in government, in school, in international organizations have to adapt to unprecedented circumstances with unprecedented speed. And I would argue with more collaboration than in the past. To complicate things even more, it is evident that the changes that are taking place now are not isolated. They feed into each other and they accelerate other changes. And let me start with an example, which is what you are here for in terms of some of the most recent events related to the prices of food and fuel, for that matter. And this is really an example that illustrates the new connection between events, the need for early recognition and speedy responses, and above all, the importance of concerted action. The speed with which food prices have increased is startling, barely giving governments and communities time to respond. Dollar-denominated food prices have increased 2.5 times from 2002 to today. And if we take into account that 3/4 of this increase has occurred in only the last 16 months alone, and over half of it in just the last 4 months, one can tell how important it is, what I was saying before, in terms of adapting to changes. For those who live in Asia, an international rice price of over $1,000 per ton, US dollars, is unprecedented, and it hurts because rice makes about 1/3 of the daily calorie intake of the typical household. In some countries, the increases in prices of food in general represent about 3/4, 75% of the income of some families. In real terms, rice prices are now higher than at any time since the commodity price shocks in the mid-70s. The spike we see now in the rice market reflects a complex set of factors connecting policies in markets in different countries and across several different products. These factors include higher demand for food in emerging economies like China and India, but also Brazil and other very large emerging economies. Higher food prices, which have increased the cost of transport and fertilizers. A decrease in funding for agriculture and agricultural research in the past decade. Increasing use of certain food crops for biofuels, which have pushed up the price of other staples such as rice. Distorting subsidies and trade barriers, financial speculation, and weather-related problems. In this kind of environment, it is clear that we need good and timely information, quick reflexes, complex skills, and above all, the will for joint action. The key element in any longer-term solution will be to increase global food production. There are not temporary solutions. Actions taken by each country in isolation of others or in individual markets without considering their links to other markets will not work. It is equally important that support be provided for the poor, those most vulnerable groups in society, in ways that do not lock in new market distortions that will have their own negative impacts later on. Removing obstacles to encourage markets to increase supply is the most crucial but often the most difficult action to take. Still, this approach will minimize the chances of long-lasting adverse effects on national economies. It is ironic, as your senior minister noted a short while ago, that, and I quote, "It often becomes more difficult for governments to forge domestic consensus on the continual policy adjustments needed to sustain growth at the very moment when such adjustments are most needed." End quote. I feel a special affinity coming to Singapore because it is one of a few countries smaller than my own, El Salvador. Small countries with big neighborhoods share a similar worldview. They understand the need to adapt, to be quick, nimble, and flexible. Few countries understand this new reality more than Singapore. Your prosperity reflects the ability of the country as a whole to adjust to change. While much of the world was debating whether China's steady growth was a threat or an opportunity, Singapore's leaders were encouraging people to learn Mandarin and opening tourist offices in the Western provinces. While other countries were dealing with the collapse of the high-tech bubble, you brought people together to review all aspects of your competitiveness. This response was typical of the pragmatic approach that saw Singapore rise from being a vulnerable developing economy in 1965 to become a prosperous, stable, developed economy barely a generation later. The early decisions to create the partnership between the public and private sectors to attract business and knowledge from abroad, to strengthen the civil service and to give Singaporeans a stake in their country through retirement savings and home ownerships challenged many of the established norms at that time. Today, people come here to study the lessons of your success, and they are right to do so. There are important lessons to be learned from this remarkable country, not just in the decisions that were made, but in the sequencing of them and the way they reinforce each other. This is one of the few countries I know of where ordinary citizens can afford world-class health care and where the tax burden is minimal. It is one of the few countries in the world that has leaped from a third world economy to a first world economy within a generation. And this is one of the economies that the World Bank now regards as the best place in the world to do business. I don't mean for a second to pretend that everything in your history went off without a hitch, but the ability to make decisions, often controversial ones, I may add, such as the choice of English as the language of business, and to stick with them when they work or drop them when they don't, is an unusual national trait. It is a trait that anyone looking at your port or your urban or traffic management would do well to factor in their own decision-making processes. Today I would like to share with you what I see as three major changes in front of us. And of course, at the end, we're also going to have a chance for a Q&A session. I would like to explain how the World Bank sees affecting Asia in particular, and then give some thoughts on what this might mean for the World Bank Group and also for Singapore. The first most significant and most visible change taking place is the shift of power between countries and within countries. The old civilizations of China and India are again ascending to positions of global prominence. Their rise has already seen a shift in trading patterns and investment flows. And strategic partnerships are also being remade to take account of this new global order. The changes in Asia have been profound. Economic growth, more open markets, and new opportunities have lifted tens of millions of people from poverty. Today's children could see absolute poverty eliminated in Asia within their generation. In 1980, Asia contributed to about 20% of the world's GDP. Today, that's close to 40%. Asia today is not just a growth pole, but a major source of finance, of ideas, and development assistance. We are also seeing the Middle East moving as another power region, in part because of the enormous wealth generated by high oil prices. The sovereign wealth funds of Asia and the Middle East are relatively new, but increasingly important players in global finance markets. The growth of sovereign wealth, especially in emerging market countries, has been one of the decade's most notable trends in finance. It is important that we recognize the opportunities these funds provide, both for investors and for the countries in which they are investing. Major investments by sovereign wealth funds, including from Middle Eastern countries, were central to global efforts to at least begin to count the recent turbulences in financial markets, especially in the U.S. These investments of almost $7 billion in Citibank and 11 billion Swiss francs in UBS illustrate both the truly global nature of markets today. Recent proposals by World Bank President Robert Selleck to encourage sovereign wealth funds to consider investing up to 1% of their assets in Africa and emerging economies are not for altruistic reasons, but because they make business sense. Investment by sovereign wealth funds in emerging markets can potentially help to diversify portfolios and generate significant investment returns. Power is shifting not just among countries or between countries, but within countries. New communications technologies are linking students, business, and civil society groups and giving them greater reach and greater access than ever before to information, to knowledge, and to each other. These new networks can be used to raise issues, to strengthen communities, share ideas and information in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. A few years ago, few people knew of YouTube. Today, more than 100 million videos are downloaded each day. Google has entered the language as a verb, as in, I Google him, and text messaging has changed the way the whole generation communicates. For the first time in history, people have, if anything, access to more information that they can necessarily know how to use. The availability of information creates enormous opportunities, but will also require businesses, governments, and others to adapt quickly. The second major change is rising incomes on one hand and environmental impacts and economic uncertainty on the other hand. By 2012, we estimate that 95% of East Asia's people will live in a middle-income country. These are countries with annual per capita income above $1,000 in today's dollars. This is changing the type and amount of food consumed in the region, the demand for energy supplies, and the expectations of people in wealthier societies. East Asians are now moving from being low-cost suppliers to being middle-income consumers as well. Domestic demand in major factor-driven economy. Domestic demand is a major factor driving economic growth in many countries of the region. Growth has also been accompanied by pollution of air and waterways and destruction of many natural habitats, including forests and wetlands. These environmental impacts not only contribute to direct environmental challenges such as deforestation, loss of fisheries, and unsafe drinking water, but increasingly also to the quality and length of human life. It's a simple statement, but not the less true: water is life. Research shows that in some countries, even as incomes have been rising, more people are becoming sick and dying as a result of air and water pollution. The third major change is that gains in poverty reduction have been accompanied by growing inequality and have also produced or exposed pockets of fragility. Though East Asia has grown strongly in recent years, over 25% of the region's population lives below the $2 a day poverty threshold, highly vulnerable to rises in fuel prices, food prices, or to sudden downturns. The plight of people in remote areas or in areas of conflict is also more starkly apparent at a time when so much of the surrounding region has been growing strongly. Fragile states are not only an African phenomenon, as commonly imagined. Outside Africa, the region with the most fragile states is East Asia and the Pacific. The trend of wealth creation is encouraging a truly historic migration of people from the country to the cities, from the countryside to the cities, and they will continue to move at a rate of 2 million per month over the next 25 years. Driven in part by better economic opportunities in urban areas, this wave is helping to lift incomes, but also creating new areas of poverty and hardship on the fringes of cities. It is also placing huge new strains on urban water, power, health, education, and transport systems. Already more than 100 cities in China alone have in excess of 1 million residents. These fundamental changes affect not just Asia, but the World Bank, which is, after all, a reflection of the world it serves. We have just concluded a major overhaul of our operating strategy in East Asia and the Pacific in response to these changes. We emphasize 4 core themes. First, increasing our focus on middle-income countries, both for their own benefit and to help other countries increase incomes. Asia needs investment, but even more so, it needs global experience and access to knowledge. We are tailoring our engagement to recognize this and to provide faster, cheaper, and more customized advice and financing for our clients. Most importantly, the World Bank is not just about providing finance. A critical element of the bank's work is sharing global knowledge, including the knowledge and expertise developed in East Asia. Our loans increasingly support pilot reforms or trial programs, so lessons can be learned and applied more widely across different economies. We are also focused on using this expertise to open markets and strengthen institutions so that individual projects can be extended beyond a particular case. The bank is, for instance, helping to advance carbon finance trading, microfinance, and domestic currency bond markets. So the impact is greater than the individual investments. Second, helping the poorest and most fragile areas to be peaceful and to reduce poverty. Even as it continues to grow strongly, the region has about 500 million people living below $2 a day. This is about 1/5 of the world's poor. These poor people live in remote areas, in slums, or are from minority groups. A disproportionate number are women. Rising national income has passed them by, and we are constantly asked by countries to help them address that inequity. The key is working with governments to remove obstacles in order to unleash individual potential. There is nothing more powerful than allowing people to take destiny into their own hands. Our focus is shifting also to provide specialized services to countries or parts of countries confronting or recovering from unrest or instability. Mindanao in the Philippines, Aceh in Indonesia, and the far south of Thailand. These are among the surprising number of fragile locations in an otherwise prosperous, stable East Asia. The sad events in Myanmar and China in the past few weeks have unfortunately brought home the fact that the region remains vulnerable to natural disasters. I extend my condolences to all those people affected by these disasters. Looking at both situations, I am reminded of the importance of functioning institutions to effectively provide services for the population. Transparent, coordinated, and quick responses are obviously critical at such times. The environmental and institutional fragility of a number of the Pacific Island states also has been clearly seen in the recent past. Unless these areas and states can be assisted to return to stability in an environment where citizens feel secure, poverty will persist and people will not enjoy the benefit of Asia's rise on the global stage. We are also introducing new products, from contingent loans to insurance, that will allow clients to better manage risks, such as those in a catastrophe or poor harvest. Third, strengthening our support for global issues and to reinforce regional cooperation. The environment has suffered serious impact as land has been cleared, more cars and manufacturing industries have come into operation, and as waterways have been polluted by industrial and household waste. Infrastructure investment has lagged and can put a brake on growth. Almost 200 billion a year of new capacity is needed just to keep up a pace with demand. ASEAN is now motivated to move ahead with greater economic cooperation because it must do so in a region that is home to Japan, China, and India. At the same time, ASEAN is also reaching out through trade agreements and policy discussions to forge closer ties with its regional neighbors. We are working more to help strengthen these regional partnerships and to support the structures that East Asia has created. This might involve working with ASEAN in considering ways to adapt to climate change or cooperating with the Asian Development Bank to support initiatives in the greater Mekong sub-region where the interests of 6 countries meet in the basin region. The fourth priority for the World Bank Group in the region is to increasingly share Asia's knowledge with the world and to bring lessons from elsewhere to Asia. We have a special program of information exchange between Africa and Asia because experience from each continent is of relevance to the other. This profile of work looks very different from the project-specific lending and country-specific advisory work of years past. It is also different from the approach the World Bank takes in other parts of the world where circumstances demand other responses from us. At the World Bank, we understand that as East Asia changes, so must we, and so must all companies, groups, and organizations that seek to be effective here. Let me offer a couple of concluding thoughts on what this means for Singapore. As the most successful developing country over the past 40 years, Singapore has much to teach the rest of the world. Of course, not all lessons from a small island republic are replicable, we all know that, but in terms of decisions on policies, on investment strategies, on infrastructure, and on health, education, and urban management, Singapore is one of the world's leaders. Singapore proves that economic freedom works. I'm pleased that we have a strong partnership, especially with your International Enterprise Singapore and Singapore Cooperation Enterprise, which are active in sharing the lessons of your experience abroad. But I do believe that Singapore can and should do more. As a small, although highly successful state closely integrated with the global economy, many of the challenges Singapore faces will require multilateral solutions. Singapore typifies the benefits of trade and globalization and can be a global champion for breaking the Doha Development Agenda impasse in 2008. Singapore has been a strong voice for a successful Doha round. It has also been active in negotiating bilateral trade deals and will be a credible voice in explaining that the domestic consequences of failing to reach global deals on trade and climate change will be severe. Integrating the rising economic powers of East and South Asia into an open and sustainable global system that addresses global trade and climate change issues is very much in Singapore's interest. Addressing the challenges of growth throughout East Asia, such as the pressures from rising urbanization, regional environmental issues, and regional health issues, are also very much in Singapore's long-term security and economic interest. And it is also in Singapore's interest to encourage those states in the region that remain fragile or close to more fully embrace the potential benefits of greater engagement with the global community. Just as with Doha, solutions to these issues are likely to require at least a multilateral component as well as a bilateral engagement. The World Bank can be part of such solutions. Recognizing the potential benefits, countries such as China have also recently started to contribute to the bank's development activities in poorer countries, while others, such as Korea and Japan, have significantly scaled up their engagement. I'm pleased that Singapore continues to support the bank's work in the region. I hope Singapore will in future choose to engage even more closely. Second, your public sector and your academic community are rich sources of talent. I hope that we can work with you to share this wealth of talent a little more for the benefit of countries that have the will to reform. Financial investments in developing countries are important, but only if they are sustainable and only if they transfer knowledge or build some human capacity. We are working closely with Singapore in urban governance and management and in tertiary and vocational education. I also look forward to seeing this partnership expand and deepen. It will benefit all of us. Singapore has made a monumental contribution to the field of development. It has set the standards and the path for other developing countries to follow and for institutions like the World Bank to learn from. Yet, your minister mentor is famous even beyond these shores for his wise warnings against complacency. Having earned a well-deserved position among developed economies, the question for Singapore is whether it is ready to face the challenges of implementing cutting-edge reforms needed to further improve its position in this competitive global environment. One such challenge is the tricky task of balancing a desire for social order and stability, for many years a defining quality of Singapore's growth, with the need to allow more innovation and creativity to produce high-value goods and services in a more competitive global economy. It has been said that in the United States you can do a U-turn anywhere except where a sign forbids it, while in Singapore drivers can only do a U-turn where a sign permits it. In this anecdote there is a grain of truth. Innovation and creativity are, by definition, not orderly and not regulated. As Singapore looks to a growing and prosperous future, striking the right balance will call for some skilled stewardship and probably some risk-taking. The price of not getting it right is unlikely to be ruin, but it could slow Singapore's rise to become one of the top first world economies of our times, and that would be a pity. Another challenge, simply, is that despite the 40-plus years of growth and rising incomes, Singapore remains a small country in a developing region with no hinterland and no natural resources. It is highly susceptible to global trends, whether an outbreak of SARS or the bursting of an IT bubble. Singapore's leaders have anticipated many of these events, but as I said at the outset, the past is not the future. It will take perhaps greater skill and determination to navigate in today's uncertain world than it did 20 years ago. At that time, Southeast Asia was dubbed the miracle region, and the world was a less volatile, less connected, less competitive place than it is today. Borders had a clearer meaning, and business and politics were conducted at a different speed. At a time of increasing challenges, the margin for error for a small country like Singapore is small, despite the success to date. Let me conclude where I began. These are indeed unprecedented times, and they call for us to work together as never before to seek new, collaborative, and effective solutions, both to the problems that arise, but also to take advantage of the wonderful opportunities we see emerging. Asia can virtually eliminate poverty in this coming generation. Already millions of people are better off because of Asia's dramatic rise. Maintaining that growth and understanding its profound implications for Asia and the world is the great challenge facing us today in these exciting, uncharted years ahead. There are no excuses for failures. Singapore shows that hard work pays off. Singapore's success demonstrates the values of a strong and pragmatic leadership in pursuing economic freedom and in rejecting ideologies that do not recognize the power of private innovation, growth, entrepreneurship. You, Singaporeans, have the ability and the responsibility to continue on the path to prosperity and share your positive experience. And above all, you have a responsibility to help keep the flame of economic freedom burning brightly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Daboub, for that very profound message that you brought to us. I think within a short space, about 20 minutes, you have cast a canvas of issues that we in Singapore, we in ASEAN, we in Asia have to deal with and are dealing with. The tragedies you spoke about in China and Myanmar have brought home the reality that this is really a globalized world, and unless you find global solutions, you're going to be at disjuncts. Here, I would like to say how pleased ASEAN is that finally Myanmar has decided that it cannot handle tragedies, human tragedies of the canvas of the nature, that it has finally agreed to look for outside help. This is something that we in ASEAN feel very deeply. In contrast, China, right from day one, it has opened itself out to the world for help, assistance, sympathy. I think these two contrasting images are now coming together, and we hope this will help to shape the image of a new Asia. Mr. Daboub also has spoken particularly about Singapore. While we should take satisfaction at what he has spoken, but these are also heavy challenges for a Singapore that just does not only look after itself, but also tries to show how it can help to the rest of the world. This school, the Lee Kuan Yew School, was set up for that purpose, to share what we in Singapore over 40 years have developed in terms of governance, in terms of public policy, and so this is one of our crown jewels which we would like to share with the world. That's it. So on that score now, let me invite questions from the floor. And Mr. Daboub, you would like to take it from there? Yeah. Okay, please. Yes, please. Could you speak to the microphone?
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Daboub, for your speech. My name is Conrad. I'm from the Business Times in Singapore. I would like to ask you more about your views on what countries can do in the face of the food crisis. You said that any solution to the food crisis will require the will for joint action, but it's in a situation like this, it's always natural for governments to put their own people first, and it's hard to persuade countries in Asia or any other part of the world, for that matter, to not to impose export restrictions or other measures that might distort the workings of markets. Even when at a time when food prices are very high, governments in the US and Western Europe are reluctant to give up price subsidies for their farmers. So what sort of action do you think countries can do in the face of the food crisis? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a couple of questions, and I'll respond to 3 questions. Any other question?
Any other questions?
Sorry, I don't have a microphone. The Doha round, the agricultural components of the Doha round. I was wondering
The organizers would like questions to be addressed in the mic.
Thank you. My question has to do with the
Could we
implication.
have your identity so that...
Charles Adams, Lee Kuan Yew School. My question has to do with the Doha round and the implications of recent food price, commodity price increases for the framework for thinking about agricultural reform. Is more rapid or different type of progress in the Doha round needed? Is that one of the collective measures you have in mind? Thank you.
One more question for this round. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Sol Iglesias from the Asia Europe Foundation. I would just like the speaker to please provide more of an explanation of why the food crisis is happening, why now, and why to this extent, I suppose for the benefit of the audience. For those of us who are tracking at least the developments of this food crisis in the news, it seems to be that while there are some explanations that have been offered, like the biofuel subsidies or the lack of adequate support for agriculture for a number of years now, there still seems to be a sense of we don't really understand why it's taking place now, and therefore, and what kind of responses really, following on the question raised by our colleague from the Business Times, what kind of coordinated responses are necessary? That's all. Thank you.
You take that, the first round?
Yes. Thank you very much for the questions. I can almost link the three of them to the answer that I will give. The first, there are some facts that I think are important and that I didn't talk about them in the speech. One of them is that, for example, in the case of rice, we estimate that about 7% of the world production is internationally traded. That means that most of the production stays within the countries. So some of the factors, or the factors that I described in my presentation, like the cost of transportation, fertilizers, issues related to other crops that have also displaced rice or have been used for other purposes. These are real factors that are impacting the cost of rice, but not to the levels that we are seeing today. And I make the 7% figure to suggest that there is certainly, as I mentioned, one of the 6 things that are influencing this. There is, of course, poor or very badly timed decisions made by certain governments in terms of imposing barriers and creating or sending signals. There is a speculation, and as more liquidity has also been put in certain markets in Europe and in the United States to address the financial turmoil, some of these resources are also going to commodities, and that also feeds into the cycle of the rise of food prices. So the bank has called for a new deal for food policy, which includes short-term actions, not solutions, but actions to address the needs of the most vulnerable groups in society, those that use about 75%, in some cases 75% of their income to feed themselves, and some medium and long-term actions. And let me describe the short-term ones. There are some 54 countries with which we are working that need to provide some temporary relief to, in some cases, 5, 10, 12% of their population because of the impact that food prices have. So they are providing some direct, transparent, focalized to the demand subsidies that allow people to subsist during these radical increases in prices, and to avoid generating the levels of instability that we have seen in Haiti, but also in Egypt, for example. In the case of Haiti, for example, the prime minister had to resign. So in order to avoid the problem to become a bigger problem, actions like this in the short term are needed, and the bank is providing advice as to how to do it in a way that do not become a temporary action that then becomes a permanent problem because of the issue of providing handouts. So it has to be done transparent, focalized, etc. And we are using models that have been used successfully in Brazil and in Mexico, which is conditional cash transfer programs. These are being used in those countries that either had it in place or have enough information about the most vulnerable groups in society to put it in place in a relatively short period of time. We're also working with some countries in terms of food for work programs. And there is also school feeding programs that many of these countries have in place. So in the short term, the bank is reorienting funds for some of these countries. It's also creating a new line of resources for those countries with the highest or the greatest and most immediate need to again take actions that in the short term will ease the very difficult conditions of large or big enough portions of their population. In the medium term, the solution is actually to have the supply side respond, and for that we're working on reviewing policies that certain countries have and try to advise in terms of what are some of the best practices that have been put forward in the agricultural sector. And there are some very good examples. Again, Brazil is a good example of what can be done and how it can be done, both in terms of exploiting better the agricultural sector in a way that is as environmentally friendly as possible, but also exploiting that in the case of biofuels. They are using sugar cane and other products that do not necessarily affect the cost of food. And so when I talk about a collaborative and concerted action, I'm also talking about the fact that, for example, in the case of rice, there are 3 or 4 countries like China, Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, that they can send very important signals. And I was in Thailand last week, and I received reassurances by the Minister of Finance that their intention is to continue to supply the market as needed. And that seems to be the case also of other countries. Japan has made some announcements also recently. We believe that 1 million tons of rice is, I don't like to say the magic number, but something that will send a good signal to the market and try to bring back all of these pieces that are now jumping all over the place. There has been a domino effect. One country made a ban on exports or price controls, which create black markets and corruption, and then the other had to also respond. So we need to work as an international community and try to persuade them that whatever you do now, you may end up paying it later, because you are also sending messages to farmers in terms of producing more, and they will start to produce more, and the fictitious part or the part that is not necessarily related to real economic factors, when it triggers, it will happen that it will get some of these farmers producing and not having enough market where to sell their product. So they also need to bear in mind that whatever goes up eventually also comes down. And so we have, in our discussions with many of the countries, I think they understand the issues. they are doing something about it, but there are others, and I not think it's necessary to mention names, but there are some 7 or 10 countries which are not at this stage listening, and there is so much that there is just so much that one institution can do. It takes other actors, other players to try to persuade them. So I said I was going to try to link the 3 questions, Conrad's, Charles, and the lady from the ASEAN Foundation, to say that, well, of course, the other component of the New Deal on food policy is to try to encourage the Doha round, the Doha negotiation, to hopefully reach agreement this year. It's still quite upwards, the possibility of this to happen, but I think if it is not now, the question is when. I mean, this is the best time when this can be produced, and there is a lot of pressure from several countries. Singapore can continue also to do a lot in that respect. Again, as I said, the increase of some of the price of certain foods has been so rapid, 16 months, 12 months, 4 months, that it's hard to react for countries and for individuals. But our expectation is that these 4 or 5 big players, at least in the case of rice, can help send the right signals and hopefully contain at a given level, not at $300 per ton in the case of rice, but certainly not at 1,000 or even more when the case of the Philippines went to the market and some prices were quoted at 1,200 or more. We need that to come down significantly. But I'm also here to learn from you. I mean, if you have also suggestions or recommendations as to how one can deal with this, I'll be more than happy to listen to them. I guess there are some economic factors, there are some non-economic factors. We can, to an extent, we can deal with the economic factors, some in the short term, some in the medium term. The other non-economical factor, it takes the will of countries that can influence the market to actually do it.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Chandrasen from Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. I have basically 2 short questions. How much has the rise in fuel prices affected the food prices? And is it a reflection of commodity bubble in the rise? The other question is, while I agree that the increasing demand in rising Asian economies has affected the food prices, but do you agree that a diversion of even 5% of the world surplus production which is traded internationally has greater potential of affecting the food prices as in the current case?
Any other
That's it.
questions? Yes, please.
My name is Chidi. I live and work in Singapore, and I'm from Nigeria. Now, I have a question and also I have a suggestion to make. The question is, why would the World Bank wait for food crisis to become a major issue in the world, and then we begin to run helter-skelter trying to provide solutions, or what you call actions, to stem the tide of food crisis? Are there certain mechanisms that the bank has in place to help ameliorate the problem of food crisis that we are experiencing, particularly right now in Asia, because rice is a major staple food in the whole of Asia? So what are the mechanisms that the World Bank is trying to put in place to provide solutions to some of these problems we have? And then the suggestion I have to make is this. As a young boy, I remember that Malaysia came to Nigeria in the 60s to take palm produce. And suddenly Malaysia became the largest producer of palm oil all over the world. But right now, Indonesia has taken over from them also. So what I'm suggesting is this. A lot of the tropical region countries can actually share ideas in terms of food. Like where I come from in Nigeria, rice is not a major staple food. So if we have a crisis with rice, it doesn't bother Nigerians because we have other things to look up to eat in terms of food. So I'm looking at the situation where we can cross-pollinate ideas in terms of food, particularly for countries in the tropical region, and exchange ideas. Like in Nigeria, we have a lot of supply of yam, beans, and all the rest. So if rice prices go up, it doesn't affect Nigerians so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One more question.
My name is Chin Soon from SOP Investment. A short one. What is the World Bank's view of GMO in helping increasing the yield of the food supply?
GMO, genetically.
Well, I think some of the questions are a little bit similar to the first set of questions. So let me try another angle here. It is a time of crisis when also, opportunities arise, and I guess there is an opportunity for, in some countries, the case of Nigeria, the case of some countries in Latin America, several African countries, not only Nigeria, one can relatively easy change his diet, because rice, for example, in the case of Africa, is a 10-year-old or 15-year-old food that has come to the plates of the African people, whereas in Asia is a totally different story. The case of Latin America is mainly about corn, and so the issue of biofuels becomes certainly much more crucial. So I'm afraid I can't give an answer that fits to all the regions, or for that matter to each country. But I was saying that it's an opportunity because some countries, especially those that are net exporters, they are also benefiting. They are benefiting from the current scenario. Certainly is happening for some South American countries, but also some of the East Asian countries that are producers of some of the products that we are talking about. But they are the least number of people. The ones being affected are simply too huge, too big to ignore. And there are no magic solutions. There is not one-time shot. There is not the possibility of developing or creating a substitute, genetically modified or otherwise, in a short period of time. The technology is there to do it, and it's an opportunity for some of them to take advantage of the market that currently exists. And our view is that as long as you don't create further distortions by creating fiscal incentives or others to produce certain products, which is what happens with corn, for example, then from the economic perspective, we have no problem with that. Some countries, of course, have their own view, and we respect them. But I think that in general, if there is a demand for innovation and for adding value and for creating new alternatives, I think those opportunities should be taken, and that will be part of what I was saying before. Those countries that are consciously making a decision not to play fair in the international arena need to also see that in the medium term this can fall back and create new challenges for them. So while trying to be respectful of the decisions that net producers and net importers have, I want to say that there are opportunities. It will take longer to provide enough to satisfy the demand, and that's why you need to take some actions to those vulnerable groups in society, which is what I was trying to describe in the first part as the short-term actions that we are taking. And I intentionally talk about actions because they are not solutions. They are just temporary measures that help address the current situation. In terms of the first question, I think I answered it before, but maybe if you clarify further exactly what you meant, I would be perhaps better prepared to respond to you. Or you feel it has been responded?
My question was like the very small surplus of agriculture commodity which is traded internationally in the world. Even a small diversion has the greater potential of affecting the market as a whole rather than the demand in rising Asian economies. And the other thing is commodity trade.
Could we limit it to that so that the speaker could address that particular topic?
Yeah, a few minutes ago I talked about this magic number of 1 million tons, which seems to us that will contribute to send the right signals. It's hard to tell, there was recently on the side of oil a message from Saudi Arabia. They were going to increase production, and that not necessarily produced the effects that were expected. It seems that the elasticity is still, there's a lot of room still in there for that particular commodity. So, but we believe that, especially in the case of rice, that you are talking about a group of countries mostly affected, and all of them being neighbors and knowing each other well, that if you have 4 or 5 key players making some very bold decisions, we think that can trigger a positive effect. Again, I also said it's hard to tell whether that's going to mean coming down to $500 per ton or $700, but nevertheless, that's the right signal that needs to be given. So I'm trying to talk, I'm answering your question by saying concerted effort by more than one is needed, and if that can be close to obtaining a number of 1 million tons of rice put in the market, that will, we think, help in the current scenario.
You want to have your follow-on question? Okay.
How much is the rise in fuel prices responsible for the current food prices? And is commodity trading all over the world also playing a role in this rise in food prices?
Well, I mentioned the 6 factors, one of them being food prices in terms of the cost of food, because of fertilizers and because of transport cost. In some industries, in some areas, it is up to between 6 and 20% that is related directly to that. In some others, in the case of fertilizers, the increase, if I'm not mistaken, has been close to 39 or 40%. So, I was just in Laos yesterday, and they have 3 different kinds of rice, and some that require fertilizers, others that don't. Certainly, if you can produce longer periods of time during the year, the ones that don't require fertilizers, this effect will be less noticeable. But nevertheless, an increase of between 6 and up to 40% in some cases in the cost of fertilizers and in the cost of transport do impact you in the terms of the cost of the ton of rice, for example. But again, there are other factors, and let's not forget, supply and demand do work. Even if the demand is not necessarily for immediate consumption, and as I said, also speculation and others, it's hard to tell exactly how much of the cost come from fuel prices, but I would say it's important enough that if fuel prices continue to be high, the food prices will continue to be high. They are directly correlated.
Anyone else? Still waiting for a chance to ask questions? Yes, please.
Thank you for your talking. I'm Akrapong Kamkun from Thailand, and my question is, do you think is it possible to organize the organization that's set up for control the rise of price in this area in this region? Because some of the scholars who propose that Thailand would be the leaders, and what is your perspective in this? Thank you.
Well, I don't like cartels, if that's what your question was, and you were asking about my view. But I do think that concerted actions to make the markets work is necessary and is called for, and is what I was trying to describe. But I don't think it is a good idea to have any more cartels than the ones we currently have in other commodities. So that would be my answer to your question. I have other colleagues from the bank here with me, which are more knowledgeable on some of these topics, and I would ask them if there is something that you would like to add to what I have said, to the responses of our guests. Well, I'm the guest here, but to the students and others visiting.
Never speak in front of the boss. But the answer to your question, another word for what you're proposing is stockpiles. Yes, stockpiles is a good idea because we bring together voluntarily, have an amount, and in times of shortage of supplies, then you give. And that, I think ASEAN has developed that in forms of stockpiling of not only of commodities, but also stockpiling of money. The Chiang Mai initiative is an example of that concept of stockpile. I just thought I'd share a little story I read 2 days ago about these shortages and how they can be incurred. You know, one of the fashions nowadays is to buy online, because we think online is easy, convenient, but if you really look at it, it's very costly. Because you ordering is easy, you just click. But somebody has to produce it, somebody has to transport it, that has to go to one of the remotest parts of wherever it is, and just for one product. You say you're Amazon.com, you just order a book. But think of it, that one book, the amount of fuel, the amount of time, etc. wasted. So some of these newfangled things may not be that attractive as we think it is. There is an article, I think it was in yesterday's or today's Straits Times, I read, and made me think maybe the good old ways are still just as good. But I think what our speaker has done is he has exposed us to a whole gamut of thoughts, which I think it will be in our interest to look. And I would like to ask you to join me in giving a round of applause. Thank you, Mr. Daboub. Thank you, Mr. Daboub, for coming all the way and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Members of the press, please be seated. There will be a 15-minute press briefing.